let's take a look at this account. We're in Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. We'll begin with the gospel, and then as usual, we'll go back to the Old Testament and try to make some connections here. So, Matthew 14, verse 22 through 33 says this. Then Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was many furlongs distant from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out for fear. But immediately he spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Have no fear." Now Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, bid me come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "O man of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Let's pause there. A lot going on in this very important passage from the Gospel of Matthew. We'll try to walk through it step by step and look at several key points. Number one, it's important to recall the setting of this miracle. It takes place after the famous feeding of the 5,000 in the Gospel of Matthew. So one of the reasons this is important to highlight is because the same sequence occurs in all the Gospels. So, for example, in Matthew, in Mark, and in John, all of those Gospels, three of the four Gospels have accounts of the walking of Jesus on the water. And in all three, that account immediately follows the feeding of the 5,000. So it's like a pair of miracles. Jesus feeds the 5,000, and then he walks on the water. So it's in the wake of him having performed this amazing miracle of feeding 5,000 people from 5 loaves and 2 fish that Jesus then withdraws and he goes up the mountain to pray, right? So it gets late, and then while he is up in the mountain praying, the disciples set off across the Sea of Galilee in the boat. Now, a couple of elements about the context. Where exactly does this take place on the Sea of Galilee? Well, we don't have the exact location, but we do know the Sea of Galilee to this day is not a small lake. It's about 7 miles wide at its widest point, and it was the kind of beating heart of Galilee. It was the place of fishing, of industry, and the disciples knew it well. And when they're in their boat, it's important, the first thing to notice is they're not right next to shore. It says they're many furlongs distant from the land. Now, in John's account of this miracle, he actually says they're about 4 miles from the shore. Matthew just says many furlongs. But the point is, number one, that they're not next to the shore. Sometimes you'll have skeptics who are talking about the miracle who make the claim that, well, the disciples saw Jesus walking on the bank or something like that, and they thought he was walking on the water. Or they saw Jesus walking on a sandbar near the shore, right? And they assumed he was walking on the water. No, they're in the middle of the lake in the middle of the night, okay? And by the way, the disciples were fishermen, so I think they knew the difference between walking on water and walking on a sandbar, okay? Sorry, it's frustrating sometimes the things people add into the text, right? It's eisegesis, reading into the text. The text is very clear that they are in the middle of the water. They're far from the shore. Also notice the time. It's the 4th watch of the night. So this is in the middle of the night, sometime between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, most of us wouldn't get on a boat and be out in the middle of the night between 3 and 6 a.m. But for the apostles, they were pretty used to this because as fishermen, it was actually customary to fish at night. We'll see that in the Gospel of John, that they spend all night fishing and they don't catch anything. So they are traveling in the middle of the night, something they're pretty used to. What they're not used to, however, is being on the water in the middle of the night, in the middle of the lake, and seeing a man coming to them walking on the waves of the sea. And that's what Jesus does here in this account. He comes to them walking on the sea. Now, when they experience this, their first reaction is fear, right? And they assume that he's a ghost. Pretty interesting point there, because it shows us that apparently at least some of the disciples believed in ghosts. You could also translate this, it's a spirit, right? So that they don't think that this is a normal human being coming to them on the water. And Jesus says something very interesting. He says, take heart, don't be afraid. I'll pause there for a second. This is a clue to us that we should characterize this account of Jesus walking on the water as a theophany. A theophany, as I've mentioned in other videos, is an appearance of God. It's where God reveals his power and his glory and his presence to his people on earth. And one of the things you'll see over and over again in accounts of theophanies in the Bible is that people are always afraid. Like when they see God, they're afraid. And God's response to their fear is often to quell it, right? To say, be calm, don't be afraid, and then to speak to them, to give them some message. So in this case, Jesus says, take heart, have no fear, and then he says, it is I. Now, the literal Greek behind that expression, which most Bibles render, it is I, is ego eimi, which literally in Greek means, take heart, I am. It's not quite the same thing as it is me. Literally just says, take heart, I am. Now, on the one hand, the expression I am, ego eimi, can be used to identify someone, right? So if I ask you a question, is it you? And you say, I am, it could respond by saying, yes, it's me, right? So that can be the sense or the meaning of it. But the literal meaning of the word in context is more than that. Jesus isn't just identifying himself. He's also taking the divine name of God from the Old Testament and using it as his own. So in other words, he's alluding to the most famous theophany in the Bible. The theophany, the appearance of God to Moses on Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus chapter 3. So in that theophany, God comes to Moses and he calls Moses to go to the people of Israel who are slaves in Egypt and to set them free and to bring a message of deliverance. And Moses says, well, if I go to them, whose name shall I give them? What name will I tell them is the name of the God who sent me? And the Lord says to Moses, I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent you to them. Right? This is my name for all generations, God goes on to say. So the name, the expression I am is more than just an identification. It's the divine name. So when you take Jesus' use of the term I am, you couple it with the fact that he is walking on water and that he's saying don't be afraid, which is standard theophany language from the Old Testament. Those three things together show to us that Jesus is revealing his divinity. That he's revealing he's not just fully human, he's also divine. I bring this up because it's one of those points where skeptics will say, how can we know that Jesus of Nazareth actually claimed to be divine? If you look at the Gospels, the only Gospel where he explicitly claims to be divine is the Gospel of John, where he says, I and the Father are one, in John chapter 10, or before Abraham was, I am, in John chapter 8. Jesus never claims to be divine in the Synoptic Gospel. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. The walking on water is one of the most explicit accounts of Jesus' revelation of his divinity, because he says to the apostles, take heart, I am. So just as in the Gospel of John, when Jesus wants to reveal his divinity, he says, before Abraham was, I am, ego eimi, John 8:58. So too in the Synoptic Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus wants to reveal his divinity, he doesn't say, hey everybody, I'm God. He says, take heart, I am, ego eimi. He reveals his divinity. Now, sometimes skeptics will also say, well, all he's saying here is, it is me. He's just identifying himself. And I won't deny that he's identifying himself. That's clear in the part in the story, because Peter's going to go on to say, Lord, if it's you, bid me come to you on the water. So there is some question here about whether it's him or not, because they think it's a ghost. But he's not just identifying himself, because he's using the divine name in the context of walking on water, right? It's in the context of a miracle of divine power. That's the point here. So it's both a display of his power and a revelation of his divinity. He can take the name of God as his own because he is God, but come as man.